No one becomes a Christian and says, well, what do you know? There is a God. You see, God doesn't send people to hell for denying what they don't know, but for their sin against the God they do know. Is it reasonable to believe that God exists? Yes. Yes, it is. Why? Because it's true that God exists, and denial of that claim reduces one's worldview to absurdity. Matt says that truth is that which comports with reality. He admits he can't know what's ultimately real. Therefore, according to his worldview, he can't know anything to be true and has zero basis for challenging my claim that it's reasonable to believe that God exists.
If this sounds like a bunch of incoherent nonsense to you, welcome to the world of presuppositional apologetics. I think the reason he makes this argument, that atheists actually know that God exists, is in part because it's an attempt to rationalize what is the most plainly immoral Christian belief, that you will be tortured for eternity for not believing or doing the correct things, even if you didn't know any better and even if you were believing what you thought was most rational. I think that becomes clear when later in the debate, Sai says the following.
God makes it so that we all know he exists.
Right.
What do you mean by know? Do you mean just that we're aware of that God exists, or that we...
You have sufficient knowledge of God for your condemnation. Okay. Everyone.
By claiming that we know that God actually does exist, this is a way to shift the blame of this extremely twisted system off of the God who presides over this system and onto the person who is the victim of this system. In Sai's view, hellfire is not a simple matter of disbelieving. It's the consequence of willful rejection. But even if we granted that Sai was correct about this, that we truly do know that God exists and that we nonetheless reject him, this still wouldn't justify or suddenly make ethical a system of infinite torture in the afterlife. If there is one single argument that comes closest to completely refuting the idea of a Christian hell, it is this. There is no finite crime that can justify infinite punishment. Thus, the penalty of infinite torture for the finite crime of disobeying God's rules or wishes is simply incompatible with the just and moral God. Only a wicked monster would create and supervise a system like this. Sai claims that denying God's existence reduces one's worldview to absurdity. Why? Apparently because without believing in a God, you can't know what's ultimately real, therefore you can't have absolute certainty that anything is true, and therefore you also can't challenge Sai's claim that a God exists. Here I think he's just playing a word game that might seem intimidating on first glance, but doesn't survive a closer inspection. Yes, the atheists can't say for certain that our experience is not actually the product of some matrix-like simulation. This is the problem of hard solipsism that Matt concedes in the debate we can't solve. But within the universe that we perceive ourselves as experiencing, we can still do and believe rational and irrational things. Ultimately, we might all be living in a simulation, but within this simulation, if I smash my hand with a hammer, I'm going to be in excruciating pain. So there are still consequences for our actions, and there are still reasonable and unreasonable decisions. Nobody is ever going to say, well, I can't say for certain that we're not living in a simulation, so maybe I should just slam my fucking car into a brick wall and see what happens. The same could be said about beliefs. Within the simulation, it's reasonable to believe that the sun is at the center of our solar system, and it's appropriate to describe this as a fact. And within the simulation, it could be unreasonable to believe that a God exists. So Sai is simply mistaken when he claims that the atheist, quote, has zero basis for challenging his claim that it's reasonable to believe that God exists, end quote.
You see, you need to be able to know what's ultimately real to know what's true.
This is something that I would reject. Within the universe as we experience it, it is true to say that the sun is at the center of our solar system. Perhaps we can't know with absolute certainty that our solar system indeed does exist as we experience it, and perhaps our entire perception of the solar system is just the product of computer programming or electrical stimulation of our captive brains. But just because you can't be absolutely certain about beliefs doesn't mean that these beliefs are therefore unreasonable and doesn't make them false. Well, as you can see here in this research we've published, the new drug causes tumors to shrink by over 50%. Oh yeah? Well, can you prove that we're not all living in a simulation? Haha, therefore you can't say it's true that the drug actually has this effect. How do you think these researchers would react here? Great point, sir, or who let the crazy person into the press conference? Nobody operates like this or thinks like this in their daily lives, and it would be ludicrous if they did. I'm just imagining Cy getting pulled over for speeding, and as the cop's writing him a ticket, Cy's trying to argue his way out of it by saying things like, "You say I was speeding. How do you even know that the world exists? What if we're all just brains in a vat and me speeding is merely an illusion? Maybe you're just writing me this ticket because you love your sin." And the cop's like, "Sir, please just put your pants back on." The final thing I'll say on this point is, perhaps it is possible that we're living in a simulation. But the thing is, there's no convincing evidence that we are, so it makes sense to operate as if the universe we experience is the universe that exists, and to make decisions and adopt beliefs in accordance with the way that this universe is. I'm on Patreon. There's a link in the description if you'd like to support my content. I would really appreciate it. There's also social media links in there if you want to follow me there. I'm trying to build up some of those followings. I would really appreciate it. Make sure to subscribe for more videos if you haven't already. Hit the bell, hit the like button, post a fucking comment. All that fun stuff that's standard on YouTube. You know the fucking drill. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed this.